Believe it or not, a lot has changed in fantasy football the past 7 days alone. Players who were once great values quickly skyrocketed up draft boards and are now not values. And some of these players are now worth selling high on and trading away. So here are 12 players you should trade to your idiot league mates immediately. Let's begin with the Bears running back Khalil Herbert, who was one of the biggest preseason risers. At one point this preseason and this offseason, he was a 13th round fantasy pick. But as of right now and today and towards the last couple of weeks, he's going around 7 or 8. And there's a clear reason for this. We saw early on in the preseason great usage. And you could see that usage right here. The Bears in their first preseason games, the starters played 7 total snaps with Justin Fields, and Khalil Herbert played all 7 of those and saw every single running back opportunity, including a 50-plus yard screen touchdown. And then in week 2, he was rested with the starters as a key offensive piece. But is this enough for him to jump 5 rounds in fantasy drafts? Well, after what we saw in the third preseason game, I would say no. And a lot of people weren't paying attention to that third preseason game. But this wasn't good for Herbert. He goes out there and he plays just 4 of the 12 starter snaps. Now, he did see all of the early down usage with the starters on the first 2 drives, and then it was D'Onta Foreman who came in for the third drive and saw 6 snaps. So it was Herbert who started. He did see the first 2 drives, but only the early down usage because the rookie Roschon Johnson played both of the third down snaps. So this is completely different than Herbert playing 100% of the starter snaps on the 2 drives. Now Roschon and D'Onta Foreman are filtered in. And that 4th round rookie out of Texas, Roschon Johnson, is thought to be the best pass protector out of this backfield and pass catching running back, which is hence why he played on third downs. He's already stealing some of that usage from Herbert. So this makes that round 7 or 8 price tag not as appealing. You shouldn't have drafted him there, but if you have Herbert right now, try and sell high on him because of that early usage. Use it as leverage in your favor. You can attempt to trade him for players like James Conner, DeAndre Swift, and heck, maybe even Alvin Kamara. Now, the new Jaguars wide receiver Calvin Ridley, he warmed on me all off season because of the constant positive news coming out of Jags camp. Now, it's nice that these camp reports were good news instead of bad news, but you can't overweight just pure camp reports. And I believe that's what's happening here because Ridley went from being a 5th round pick to now a 3rd round pick. You could see the 33rd overall pick, and on some league formats often goes now in round 2. And you can see the receivers that he's going around. When he goes in round 2, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown, it's Garrett Wilson. In round 3, it's Chris Olave, Devonta Smith. I think this is just a mistake because Ridley is a solid 2nd round pick if we didn't have the concerns, and we can't ignore those concerns. He hasn't played football in over 20 months, and it's been 30 months since we saw his last elite production. The last time we saw Ridley, he was 26 years old and in his prime, and now this year he's going to be turning 29. And it is true that he's an elite talent and will likely be Trevor Lawrence's #1 receiver, but there's also a lot of other talent on this team. There's Christian Kirk, who was the #1 receiver last year, Evan Ingram, a top 5 tight end during the second half of the season, and Zay Jones. Look, I think Ridley is going to be a top 20 receiver. You can see in my final rankings and tiers this year, he's my wide receiver 17 overall. I just don't have him as a top 12 or 15 receiver where he's currently going. And the whole point of this is not to say these are bad players. No, it's to try and get as much value out of these players as you can, kind of tier up your team. So what you could do here is try and trade Calvin Ridley for somebody like a Garrett Wilson or heck, maybe even a Josh Jacobs. And then you want to make sure you trade away TJ Hockenson to some other foolish fella in your league because look, this fella just got paid and that's great news for him. As you can see from Schefter's tweet right here, Hockenson signed a 4-year deal worth $68.5 million. This is now an NFL record for tight ends. You have the contract being $42.5 million guaranteed. And Hockenson deserves this money. All players deserve to get paid as much money as possible, but he was great in his 11 games with Minnesota. He averaged 13 fantasy points on 8.2 targets per game. He was a top 5 tight end during this time, and if you take out the week 18 game where he was pulled early, only Travis Kelce was better in those 11 games. So this is all fantastic news, but his competition just increased and he's no longer in that motivational contract year because the Vikings drafted 1st round receiver Jordan Addison out of USC to replace Adam Thielen, and Addison is a fantastic producer. In 2021, he was the best wide receiver in college football, winning that award. And this is going to be a big boost to the offense because Thielen was just 78th at earning targets, earning a target on just 17% of his routes last year. Addison is immediately going to beat this in the middle of the field, which pulls from Hockenson. And Hockenson goes as a top 50 player in the 4th round, sometimes the 3rd round of fantasy drafts, which given the context about Jordan Addison is way too high. So use this news about his new contract showing how good he is and how much he got paid as leverage for you to trade him away. Some options to trade him for across different positions would be like a Drake London, Christian Watson, or Mike Williams. Now let's move into the next running back who was a value, but now you want to trade to your friends. And if you're enjoying this and finding it helpful, hit the subscribe button. It'll allow you to see all the content we do the rest of the year. And also it does help the channel out. And that running back I was hinting at is Antonio Gibson, who is by no means a bad player. He still has the cheat codes due to his elite receiving upside because yeah, he was a receiver in college. But the issue becomes we didn't see the elite usage we were promised this preseason of a 3-down role and all the pass catching work. We just didn't see it. You can see right here in week 1 of the preseason, Dwayne McFarland from Fantasy Life does great utilization charts. Week 1, this was just basically a split backfield. Brian Robinson saw 60% of the rush attempts and he actually saw 50% of the routes run, which was more than Antonio Gibson. So it was like a 50-50 backfield, but in terms of snaps, 53-47, but it was Robinson who was seeing the better usage. And then in week 2 of the preseason, Dwayne just shows us what what happens. You can see Gibson and Robinson right here. The snaps, it was 54% to Gibson. That's good, but it's basically 50-50. The rush attempts still went to Robinson at 56%. The target share still went to Robinson at 17%. I mean, the one area we saw good stuff for Gibson, as you would expect, is in the 2-minute drill. He played 80% of the snaps in that quick 2-minute offense. And the 2-minute offense does matter because it will lead to a lot of checkdowns. You're playing faster. The running back's usually involved more. Now, this is just a small sample, but all indications are that this will be a clear split backfield, and that's not what we were promised, hoping we would get out of the 9th to 10th round Gibson earlier this offseason. Now let's discuss the exciting rookie first-round wide receiver Zay Flowers out of Baltimore, who has a ton of upside, and he was somebody that I enjoyed drafting in the 11th round of drafts. But the recent movement on Flowers has him going right here as the wide receiver 43 overall in round 8 or 9 of drafts, which means his perceived value has risen like 2 or 3 rounds he's rose this offseason. Well, this leads to the question, why is he rising 2 or 3 rounds? Well, it's definitely not because of his preseason usage. Flowers earned 2 targets on just 16 preseason snaps. And this was in games without Odell Beckham Jr., Rashad Bateman, or Mark Andrews even playing. Well, it's just because of hype from camp highlights for the most part. You can see right here, Rookie Watch has a lot of followers, and they basically just hype him up on a grainy footage. You can see he's just beating a cornerback in one-on-ones, which wide receivers who are good in the first round are supposed to beat cornerbacks in one-on-one matchups. Now, the Ravens are expected to throw more this year under Todd Monken, the new offensive coordinator. You can see Alex Caruso, Todd Monken in 4 seasons, 37 pass attempts per game. Greg Roman, the former offensive coordinator, was throwing just 29 times per game. They're expected to throw more, which should help Flowers, but also all the other passing options on this team. But when the Ravens go to 2 wide receiver sets, which they probably will, it's likely going to be Flowers coming off of the field and Odell, the highest paid receiver on the team, and Bateman, the other former first-round pick, staying on the field. And we've known that information. It was baked into his 11th round price, but not his 8th or 9th round. You should now try and trade him away. Looking 1 tier ahead of him is a nice spot to try and target. If it's a Jordan Addison, a Jackson Smith-Njigba who should miss a couple of weeks, even a Brandon Cooks, Cortland Sutton, or Gabe Davis are all options that I would try and trade him for, or maybe you do a package deal. Now, the next man we have to discuss is Darren Waller, who is in line for a huge season, and he was one of the best 9th or 8th round picks you can find in fantasy, but that is no longer the case. Because towards the end of the drafts, and even right now as this is being recorded, Darren Waller is taken as a 5th round pick, the 53rd overall pick, and often goes in round 4. Now, his initial 9th round average draft position made sense because of last year. Waller was coming off of his worst season as a tight end. And it wasn't just his worst, it was by far his worst. You can see just 9.4 points per game, but still a top 10 tight end. And if you look the years before that, and even more if you dated back 2 more years, he's putting up at least 12 points, 17 top 5 performances. But as we've discussed this offseason, a lot of this had to do with the injuries that Waller dealt with last year, most notably a hamstring that started in July before the preseason started, and then he triggered that same injury, a hamstring injury, a grade 2, in October, just a couple weeks into the season, and this affected him basically the next month or 2. And not to mention, when healthy, he battled Devontae Adams, who was 2nd in targets, and Josh Jacobs, who led all running backs in opportunities. But now Waller is the #1 option for Daniel Jones in a very creative offense led by Brian Daboll. But we've known all that information since he was traded in March, so why the jump of now 3 to 5 rounds? Well, it solely has to come down to camp reports, which have been good, but also his 2nd preseason game. He's only played 8 snaps this preseason, so he played 80% of the snaps. That's 8 out of 10 from this game with the starters. He ran 8 out of the 10 routes, so 80% route participation is very good, and he earned 4 targets in this game, which was 44% of Daniel Jones' looks. So basically, he is jumping 5 rounds in drafts because of 8 snaps in the preseason, which I agree were very good snaps and made him a solid pick in round 7 or 8, but not in round 4 or 5. So where Waller goes as the 53rd overall player, yeah, you could trade him for guys in his similar range of where he was recently drafted, like Christian Watson, Drake London, even a Tyler Lockett. Or you can try and trade up and really sell high for guys like Calvin Ridley that we talked about, or a Breece Hall. Again, none of these players are bad. It's all about where their value is. We still want Ridley, just not as a 2nd round pick, but if you could trade Waller a 5th round pick for him, that's great. Now, the next man up is Damen Harris, who's not one of the sexiest options this offseason. He dealt with an injury in the preseason and camp, so we didn't see his name a lot, but he's somebody you can sell ASAP, and this might be your only time to actually sell him this year, before week 1. So Harris made his Bills debut in the 3rd preseason game. He didn't start, and he didn't earn any of the first 9 RB snaps. So what Harris did in this game was play just 4 snaps, but they were all in the red zone, and he earned a goal line touchdown, which caused a lot of people to freak out, panic about James Cook. People, this is what we always expected. The 225-pound back in Damen Harris or Latavius Murray to get the red zone work, not the 190-pound James Cook. We've known and expected this to be the split for the past few months, but now people are double counting it because they saw 4 snaps of Damen Harris in the preseason. And now Harris is a fine runner, but he's not exceptional, and he's nowhere near a good pass catcher. So you probably drafted Damen Harris like right here in round 10 of your drafts, which is fine. I mean, it's not like you spent a high pick on him, but why not try and cash in now and level him up? Some players you can try and trade him for are guys like DeAndre Swift on the upper end, and AJ Dillon, or maybe a Jalen Warren. Now, this next one up hurts because I really enjoyed about a month or 2 ago Marquise Brown in round 8, and he's still going in round 8, but we have new information that doesn't make him as appealing, and we have to adjust our previous opinions based on this information. For starters, there's the recent Kyler Murray news. Kyler is placed on the PUP list and will miss at least 4 weeks. And even more concerning is this recent news that's being reported by a couple of different sources, but the Cardinals would owe Kyler Murray $37 million, $29 million, and $26 million the next couple of years if he can't pass a physical this upcoming March in 2024. So there's a chance that they keep Kyler on the PUP list all season so he can't get hurt doing football activities. And then the idea would be that they would go ahead and draft a quarterback next year in the first round so they can get out from paying him this money. So that's new information we didn't have. And then there's also this recent information of Colt McCoy being cut, somebody who was already involved in the system, had a connection with Marquise Brown. They traded for Josh Dobbs, a journeyman quarterback, and then Clayton Tune, the 5th round rookie, are their only other options. So it's either going to be Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune. The quarterback situation hit worst case scenario. Now, Clayton Tune was fine in college. I mean, anything over 8 yards per attempt is nice. He was nearly 70% accuracy his final 2 years as a starter. His touchdowns, 70 touchdowns to just 20 interceptions, a 3.5 to 1 ratio his final 2 years. This is all great. But he was doing this at Houston in the American Athletic Conference, and that's why he was a 5th round pick. So Hollywood, the guy who was literally the wide receiver 6 in fantasy to start last year's first 5 or 6 weeks before injury, now it's just hard to get there because so much has changed about his outlook. So try and sell him now for similar tiered players like Treylon Burks returning from injury or even Brandon Cooks. And then you also want to make sure you get this next asset, which is the fantasy blueprint, because if you want to win your fantasy league every week of the year, smack around your opponent for that week, this is for you. It'll have all the tools and analysis you need to do just that. Very simply put, like our rankings you can see right here, our rest of season rankings for trades, waiver information, projections, Discord access, a whole lot more. Now the blueprint is easy to get. You just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below and follow the 2 simple steps. Now these are those 2 steps, and here's the thing right here. If you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'm going to be giving you tools every single day of the week for the rest of the season, but if you don't make the playoffs, I'll just refund the payment, which is only $5, by the way, for the entire year. So if you want to join the thousands of people currently using the blueprint for week 1 right now to have the best lineup and stay ahead of their buddies, well, just scan the QR code or click the link in the description below. All right, now we got to talk about Mr. Kenneth Walker III, who's worth trading away because his offseason has been a roller coaster. It started off as him being overvalued in the 2nd round early on in like March of fantasy drafts, and then he fell to like the 5th and 6th round when Zach Charbonnet was drafted, so then he was undervalued, and he's basically settled in as like a 3rd or a 4th round pick. You can see right here the 39th overall player of drafts, and honestly this is just somewhere where I just want to trade him away. Now ideally you got him in round 5 or 6 so you can kind of sell away that value, but look, here's the deal. Kenneth Walker has been hurt basically the entire preseason and training camp. July 26th, a groin injury that's kept him out. Now he's expected to play week 1, but who really knows? And this has given the rookie Zach Charbonnet all the opportunity in the world to get even more first team reps with the offense. And the 2nd round rookie is already thought to have the receiving role locked up on this team. 37 catches last year in college, 24 the year before, is way better than anything we saw Kenneth Walker do in college. But now if Charbonnet sees more first team reps, maybe he'll start to steal the red zone work, which makes this a red alert if you own Kenneth Walker. Because a reminder, Walker was a 3rd or 4th round fantasy pick. Charbonnet was a 9th or 10th round pick, and they would have basically the same role, if not better, for Charbonnet, who is the more athletic back and better pass catcher. And it's kind of trending this way right now, which would be a huge loss for you if you drafted Walker. So I'd be trying to sell Kenneth Walker for some guys around him, maybe like a Breece Hall, or guys who go right above him, ideally in a Jahmyr Gibbs before Thursday, because after that you might not be able to get Gibbs, a Joe Mixon, even an Aaron Jones. Now the next man up we got to talk about is the veteran Adam Thielen, who was a preseason stud. I mean, this guy was fantastic for the Panthers. And we could check out Dwayne McFarland's utilization chart here for the entire preseason for what these Panthers receivers did. Adam Thielen, the target share, the amount of times he was targeted out of all of the Bryce Young pass attempts, 35% of the time. I mean, this would have led the NFL last year on this small sample. He caught 6 of 7 of his targets for 63 yards and a touchdown. And look, as we discussed earlier when talking about Jordan Addison, this was nice to see out of Thielen because he was pretty brutal last year, ranking 78th at being able to get targets and having his worst overall year in efficiency, the yards per route run. But we can't weigh this small sample too much because he's now turning 33 years old, and also DJ Shark and Terrace Marshall missed some preseason games. And it might seem like he has a good week 1 matchup against Atlanta. Like they have AJ Terrell there. Their safeties aren't all that great. Jeff Okudah from the Lions, former top 10 pick, is now there. He's not the greatest, but Thielen's probably going to see Mike Hughes in the slot, and that's a concern. Hughes only allowed 2 catches per game last season in coverage. So in my opinion, you should leverage this great preseason immediately and trade him away. And you could even target players a tier or 2 above him to try and get in this deal, like a Gabe Davis, like a Rashad Bateman, maybe even a Zay Jones. You can look even further down like a Marvin Mims or a Treylon Burks. Okay, let's talk about Deion Jackson. By the time you're watching this, he might not be all that relevant anymore, but it seems like people want him on their fantasy teams, and there's really no point for you to try and get him. Look, you have Jonathan Taylor and Zach Moss currently out out with injuries. This is why people are jumping on Deion Jackson. And he was solid last year when given opportunities. In week 15, he scored 13 points, and in week 6, he was the #1 running back, scoring 28 points. Look, Jackson's a big back, pushing 220 pounds. He has great speed, 91st percentile, well above average burst, so he's a solid athlete overall. But this is a guy who relies on receptions. Heck, when he was the #1 overall running back in week 6, he had 10 catches because guys like Matt Ryan were checking it down to him. But now his quarterback is Anthony Richardson, who is not going to check it down. Richardson will replace checkdowns with scrambles just like he did in college. And this is an issue because Deion Jackson is not a good runner. He did a lot basically as a receiver last year, but as a runner, just 3.4 true yards per carry, 70th amongst all running backs. And based on the recent news from The Athletic that was released this week on Zach Moss returning from a broken bone, Coach Shane Steichen said he hopes Moss is healthy week 1. So he might be healthy week 1, but if he's not, he's probably coming back week 2 or 3. And that means you're just getting Deion Jackson for a couple of weeks as a rental, and he's still going to split the backfield with rookie Evan Hall and his mobile quarterback Richardson. So I'd be trying to trade Deion Jackson for as much as you possibly can. Some of these upside RB2s will be great, like Elijah Mitchell, Jalen Moore, and Tank Bigsby, even Kenneth Gainwell, Tyler Algier. I'd rather have all these guys over Jackson, who is likely to be a 1 to 2 week rental in a split backfield still. And then there's Aaron Jones, who is somebody that might only see his value drop as the season goes on. He's often taken right now in like round 3 or 4 of fantasy drafts. As the 37th overall pick, you can see right here, look, I'm pretty neutral to him all off season. I liked him when he was falling into round 5, but in round 3, there's not much here. Because in my opinion, he's not the same type of player in upside this year, this is the latest he's gone in 4 years, as players right next to him in Jahmyr Gibbs, major upside. Joe Mixon, great role. Ramondre Stevenson, both the upside and the role. Because there are a few ways things can go really bad for Jones this year, and the first one is obvious. Jordan Love struggles, and Jones doesn't earn as many red zone looks. Look, this is a real possibility. I don't think Love will be god-awful, but we haven't seen it. And the second concern would be that head coach Matt LaFleur takes back to play calling now that Aaron Rodgers is gone and uses A.J. Dillon more, a guy that he wanted to go get in the second round in 2020, and reminds him of Derrick Henry, who he coached when he was the offensive coordinator with the Titans. And last year alone, A.J. Dillon outtouched Aaron Jones at the goal line 10-2, which makes a lot of sense because Dillon is a monster. 6 foot, 247 pounds, literally reminds you of the size of Derrick Henry. Now, week 1, Aaron Jones and this team does have a good matchup. They are slight underdogs on the road against the Bears, but the Bears' defensive line and defense in general isn't all that solid. You could see an Aaron Jones vintage performance of like 80 plus yards and a touchdown in this one, which maybe you get even more value than sell high on. But you are taking a risk because if Dillon is involved more, the offense looks terrible, you basically probably lose all leverage for the rest of the season. So these are all players you should trade away and avoid in drafts. On drafts that you can take right now on Underdog, the best ball format. Look at this. They have the Best Ball Mania, a massive contest with 15 million in prizes, 3 million to first. Weekly winners you could play every week during the season. Best ball leagues draft them. The best favorite tournament of mine, the Puppy, because it's just $5 to get in with 250 grand in prizes. This is best ball, which means you just set your team for the season or for that specific week while you're drafting, and then you do nothing else. No waivers needed. They automatically take your highest scoring players. And this is the Puppy contest that I talked about. Just $5 to get into. There's still a ton of spots left by the time that you're watching this, so make sure to get in. $250,000 in prizes is massive. And you can get a free entry up to $100 by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the description below and just using the code SAL when you sign up. So these are the guys you need to trade away to your idiot league mates. But if you want to see the guys you should be trading for, maybe even in deals for these specific players, well, you need to check out this beautiful video right here. If you made it this far, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can see all the content we have coming out the rest of week 1 and into week 2.